The first day of the Somme offensive proved extremely costly for Allied forces and families back in Britain. 1 in 5 men who went into combat that day was killed. But the first casualty was the plan.
Over my shoulder, you can see the road that comes towards this wheat field. That's the line of a trench on the map called Dundee Avenue, and it was down that trench that Gilson and his men marched on the 1st of July 1916 to approximately this point. Let's picture Rob on this morning. His foot on the ladder, his eyes on his watch, and that fatal whistle close to his lips. What brought Gilson and his men to this point on this particular day? And what went wrong? Let's start at the very top. Let's think about Haig, the relatively new Commander-in-Chief of the British Army. What was his decision-making? It's a political decision. Haig is in a relatively new position of authority. He's not long been appointed Commander-in-Chief of the British forces. He needs to show the French that the British are actually in this war. It's a coalition effort after all. The French are under pressure themselves. Earlier in 1916, they'd been attacked at Verdun, and the German plan was simply to bleed the French white. The British were committed to helping their French allies. Haig was attracted to fighting here because it was excellent open country. The sector was relatively quiet, and he thought that he could actually take on the Germans on a very broad front. He could use 20 divisions line abreast against the Germans, perhaps on a 20-mile front. He might even be able to use his beloved cavalry should there be a breakthrough. It seemed an ideal opportunity. The next man to consider is the next man down in the line of command, and that's Rawlinson. He's actually commander of the 4th Army, and that's the army that Gilson is in. Now, Rawlinson actually disagreed with his chief. He thought of a strategy called bite and hold. He didn't like the idea of a broad front attack because he thought it might dilute British forces too much. He wanted to take on individual German strongpoints, full of machine gun posts and deep dugouts. Take those, bite those out of the German front line, and you might make progress. But orders being orders, he has to do what Haig wants. Gilson is in the 34th Division. The man in command of that division is Brigadier General Turnen, and he's convinced that his men can do an excellent job on this sector. He's heavily biased in favour of his favourite units, and that's the Tyneside Scottish and Tyneside Irish, which might explain why the divisional map is so full of Scottish and Irish place names. Rob Gilson's immediate superior officer, his company commander, Major Morton, would have told Rob, "You're in the 4th wave, this is your trench, watch the first 3 waves go in, then it's your turn." More precisely, here are the orders. Each battalion will attack in 4 waves with 3 companies. 1 platoon from each company in each wave. 11th Suffolk will be known as D Battalion. D Battalion will pass through the 10th Lincolns within 2 minutes of the barrage lifting. The remainder of the battalion frontage will be consolidated along the German trench with Lewis guns at the fore. Selected men to push forward if the village of Contalmaison has been evacuated. That's about 1.75 miles in that direction. They get no further than 300 yards. Why did the infantry attack fail? It has a lot, of course, to do with the failure of the artillery plan. Now, it looked impressive. It had started on the 24th of June and had been extended for 2 days before the attack, Z-Day, went in. In total, 1.5 million shells were fired into the German front line. On the 30th of June alone, 375,000 shells had been fired at the German positions. It looked impressive, and no doubt on the receiving end, it was appalling to experience. The British even mixed in gas shells as part of their attack. But the plan did not work. Haig has diluted his effort. He doesn't have enough guns. He's actually attacking an area that's about 25,000 yards long and 2,000 yards deep. He doesn't actually have enough guns to cover it. Each 1,000 square yards received about 30 shells, and it wasn't going to be enough, especially when you consider how deep the German dugouts were. And many of the shells fired were the wrong type. High explosive shells were the ones needed to actually break into bunkers and to kill the occupants. Of the 1.5 million shells fired, 1 million were shrapnel shells, designed to destroy wire, which they were incapable of doing. What Haig really needed were more high explosive and more howitzers to deliver it. Now, howitzers fire at a very steep angle, and the shell comes in very steep as well. But the really big ones that fire shells weighing 1,400 pounds, well, Haig only had 6 of those. Remember, he's got a 20-mile front. So, of course, the damage they can do is pretty limited. Now, that dilution of effort has a remarkable effect. Basically, if you break it down, the figures show that for every 10 square yards of the German positions, they were only getting 1 pound of high explosive. Compare that to what they could do in World War II. Allied generals in the Normandy campaign could drop 700, 800 tons of high explosive on a target in 7 minutes, not 7 days. So Haig and his gunners were doing the best they could, but it was going to prove fatal to the infantry. Today at Staff College, young officers are told to reenact the Battle of the Somme and to attack strongpoints like the Schwaben Redoubt. Their solution? Use a tactical nuclear device. That gives you some scale of the problem that Haig and his generals faced. Crucially, even though the British infantry didn't know it, because of the failure of the artillery attack, they were now engaged in a race to the parapet. Not their parapet, but the German one. Whoever got to that parapet first would win the battle. The Germans have about 30 metres. The British have 300 metres, and they're carrying 66 pounds of kit. Who do you think is going to win? Unfortunately, the preliminary bombardment had not wiped out the German garrison in La Boisselle, and they came out from their deep dugouts, manned their machine guns, and caught the Cambridgers and everyone else in their sector in a deadly crossfire, and they took very heavy casualties. The Germans had deliberately not used their artillery behind the lines so as not to give away their position to Allied bombardment. So as our troops advanced across no man's land, they were caught in artillery fire and killed. Rob Gilson, of course, was leading part of the 4th wave of attack. So he witnessed the first 3 waves fail, but still had to go in.
Only at the southern end of the 20-mile front was there any Allied success, with the French achieving their objectives. But in Gilson's sector, objectives are not reached, and the losses are very heavy.
I've just walked up out of what was called Sausage Valley, in amongst the wheat and the maize. But if you look where you're putting your feet, you see another kind of harvest, an iron harvest. And reports say that Rob Gilson and his sergeant were killed by shell fire, and this may well be a piece of shell casing. 190 Suffolks were killed on the 1st of July 1916, and Rob is quite unusual in that his body was recovered and he was buried over in Beccor. 148 of the Suffolks have no known resting place, and they're commemorated on the Thiepval Memorial.
The Somme campaign has since become a symbol of an unnecessary sacrifice. But the 1st of July 1916 also signalled the beginning of a shift in the war. The failure of the first day did not persuade Haig to abandon the assault. Instead, he committed the British Army to fight for another 3 months. The aim? Break through the enemy lines or kill as many Germans as possible in the process. Throughout the campaign, the British Army learnt valuable lessons on the use of artillery and new technology like the tank, aircraft and modern communications. And in the months that followed, 500,000 Germans died. The following year, for fear of another onslaught in the west, the German High Command issued orders for a strategic withdrawal to a stronger position, the Hindenburg Line. Just a year and a half later, the war is over. Quantifying the true impact of the campaign and whether it helped end the war can be difficult. But even harder is justifying the cost and sacrifice required of those men and that generation 100 years ago.